Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Tuesday, the 15th of November. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. The United States and European Union have condemned the so-called regulation bill designed to prevent the court-ordered evacuation of the outpost of Amona by retroactively legalizing illegal outposts built on private Palestinian land. The proposed law is up for its first vote in the Knesset tomorrow. IBA's political reporter Kalev Ben-David is here with the details. Kalev?
Thanks, Alon. Legal officials here, including Attorney General Avichai Mendelblit, have warned that the new law, which would allow the government to seize private Palestinian land in the West Bank for settlement expansion, could pose problems for Israel with the international community. And yesterday, the U.S. State Department criticized it as an unprecedented and troubling step.
We're deeply concerned about the advancement of legislation that would allow for the legalization of illegal Israeli outposts located on private Palestinian land. Israel's own Attorney General has reportedly expressed serious concerns about the constitutionality of the proposed legislation. If this law were enacted, it could pave the way for the legalization of dozens of illegal outposts deep in the West Bank. This would represent an unprecedented and troubling step that's inconsistent with prior Israeli legal opinion and also break longstanding Israeli policy of not building on private Palestinian land. Our policy, as you know, on settlements is clear. We believe they are corrosive to the cause of peace. This legislation would be a dramatic advancement of the settlement enterprise, which is already gravely endangering the prospects for a two-state solution. This only makes clear the choice Israel faces between building more settlements and preserving the possibility of peace. I would note we understand this legislation has several more steps to go before it's passed. We hope it does not become law.
Also weighing in on Amona was the European Union's ambassador to Israel, Lars Faberg-Andersen, who told reporters yesterday the EU was concerned about the bill and other steps that could retroactively legalize unauthorized settlements such as Amona. The proposed law, he warned, will create great resentment in the international community and could cause chaos in the Palestinian Authority. He added that the EU's position that the settlements are an obstacle to peace is unchanged, despite statements made by U.S. President-elect Donald Trump during his campaign. The regulation bill is scheduled to come up for its first reading in the Knesset Wednesday, a vote Prime Minister Netanyahu had unsuccessfully fought to delay in hopes of resolving Amona's fate without resource to this piece of legislation, which is being pushed by Education Minister and Jewish Home Leader Naftali Bennett. If the bill passes in the Knesset plenum tomorrow, it will still need to move through the committee process and its second and third reading votes before becoming law. That legislative process will be racing the calendar after the Supreme Court Monday reaffirmed its order to evacuate Amona by December 25th. Amona residents held an emergency meeting last night after the ruling and called on the Prime Minister to personally intervene to save the settlement outpost, upping the pressure on Netanyahu to resolve an issue that is both dividing his government and threatening to complicate Israel's foreign relations. Elon?
Kalev, a prediction. Will the regulation bill pass its first reading in the Knesset tomorrow?
Well, right now it looks like it will, because nobody in the coalition has actually come out and said they're going to vote against it, except for Likud MK Benny Begin, and even Prime Minister Netanyahu has not said he's going to vote against it, despite his opposition. So I think the feeling among especially other party leaders, why help Netanyahu out of this difficult situation that he helped create. However, there is a question whether this bill in its current form could pass final votes in the Knesset. Several ministers, Lieberman, Kachlon, some of the Haredi leaders have expressed reservations about the bill.
So what are the Prime Minister's options now that the court has said time is up and the state only has, or the government only has, a month to pass this legislation through committee, second, third stages before the demolition date?
He could try to work it in the Knesset and when it goes to committee to see if he can get some kind of bill that maybe is less sweeping, that could pass muster with the legal establishment, with the Attorney General Mendelblit. But that is going to be difficult to do. He might have to go ahead and evacuate Amona. The one thing to note here is that Naftali Bennett, the Jewish home leader, has not said that he will pull out his party if that evacuation goes ahead. So we're not necessarily talking about the government collapsing if that happens.
We just heard some very stern words from the US State Department. How serious an international backlash should the government expect if it pushes through with the regulation bill?
You know, it's interesting, Alon, because we just had this election in the U.S. and some of Donald Trump's advisors, Jewish advisors, have said that settlements are not an obstacle to peace. This may be, and Naftali Bennett made this point, maybe this won't be such a big issue now with the U.S. But as I said, we heard the EU ambassador to Israel say
other countries in the world other than the United States.
Other countries, and of course Europe, the European Union, Israel's main trading partner. This could be a big problem, and this is what Attorney General Mandelblit has talked about, that passing this law could open up, for example, Israeli government officials to prosecution in the ICC, the International Criminal Court at The Hague.
Kalev, is it possible that the Jewish home ministers here are playing a long game and defying the court to strike down the regulation bill as an excuse to weaken the High Court and the judicial branch?
There is a lot of speculation about that. We know that the Supreme Court is a major issue for Jewish home. That's why they insisted Ayelet Shaked of their party become the justice minister. Beyond that, there is also putting the prime minister in a difficult position. If he has to evacuate Amona, he will lose a lot of support in the settlement community. And of course, that is a part of the electorate that he is fighting with Naftali Bennett for future elections. So it looks like politics is part of the equation here.
Kalev, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Police have detained a former senior member of the National Security Council on suspicion of bribery, money laundering, fraud and breach of trust. Another suspect was also brought in for questioning. The man is reportedly suspected of advancing the personal affairs of a businessman from abroad in exchange for bribes for himself and his family. The former NSC official had been considered for a promotion to a highly sensitive position, but resigned in the process. In the past, there were reports of his links with businessmen involved in gas exploration. The police investigation was the result of a complaint filed by the group Omets, Citizens for Clean Government. The businessman suspected of involvement in this bribery is reportedly currently serving prison time in another country for fraud convictions. Ayub Kara, the Deputy Minister of Regional Cooperation, has come under fire for divulging details of a highly sensitive security-related incident involving Israel, all details of which are still under a strict gag order. Yesterday, Kara published details on his Facebook page, and a number of reporters also received emails with the details. But after a senior security official accused him of endangering lives with the revelation, Kara removed his post and claimed that the details were not subject to censorship at the time of the posting. The deputy minister said he decided to publish the details at the request of those involved in the mysterious affair out of concern for human life. Any attempt to attribute blame to Kara, as seen in the media, comes purely from the imagination of the journalists and anonymous political activists, said a statement issued by his office. October saw an increase in the number of terror attacks in Israel, 153 compared to 109 attacks in the month of September. This, according to figures released by the Shin Bet agency. 103 attacks took place in Judea and Samaria, 48 in Jerusalem, and 2 from the Gaza Strip. 2 Israelis were killed in October, a police officer and a female civilian. The profile of the attackers reveals the majority as young and single without any affiliation to terrorist organizations, and many without prior security offenses. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, the Israel police says there has been a 40% decline in violence compared to figures released by Shin Bet for last year. Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan attributed the decrease to the strengthening of a police presence in the capital, adding that soon an additional 1,200 police officers will be deployed in the capital, manning positions inside East Jerusalem communities. European states have been funding Palestinian human rights NGOs directly affiliated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. That's according to a new report by NGO Monitor released yesterday. The PFLP is an internationally recognized terror group responsible for such attacks as the Har Nof synagogue massacre and the murder of the Fogel family in Itamar. According to the report, the EU, UN and several European states have been funding a network of NGOs, including Adamir and Al-Haq, which are either directly affiliated with the PFLP or include numerous employees linked to the group. Well, joining me now in the studio is Josh Bacon of NGO Monitor, the author of the report on international funding of the PFLP. Josh, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Are European governments aware of the links between the NGOs they're funding and the PFLP?
Well, these links are hardly a secret. It's all open information. So I would say that yes, they are aware.
And how do you explain, therefore, the absence of due diligence in providing these sums to organizations affiliated with people they themselves say are terrorist groups?
Well, that is exactly the question we are putting now to the European governments. We think that terrorism is not only an Israeli problem, it's definitely a European problem at this point, and we think that they should definitely freeze and reevaluate all this funding, and only pending an investigation continue the funding.
But to date, what do you think explains their willingness to continue giving funds that I assume, according to open source material, is linked to terror groups?
Well, that is a good question. Well, all assistance to terrorist groups is prohibited, meaning these are designated terrorist groups. So this is a very good legal question, which we need answers to and currently don't have them.
Are there legal options that citizens in these countries might be able to take, or Israel itself, to force the EU to stop funding these organizations?
Well, there have been attempts by other organizations to do so, like Shurat ad-Din and other groups. At this point, what the governments say is that as they don't see direct ties to violence, they don't see a reason to stop funding these groups. This is Australia, for instance.
Australia says it hasn't seen any direct links to violence.
That's
okay.
True.
I presume that NGO Monitor has approached a number of these governments to raise its concerns?
We have now. We are still awaiting responses.
So over the years they haven't responded at all to various allegations of unsavory groups to which they're linked?
That's true.
You note in your report that the EU knows that that human rights NGOs are susceptible, they're highly at risk when it comes to money laundering, and yet they continue giving funds to them. Is it possible for governments to know with 100% certainty that there aren't any unsavory links to the groups they're funding? Is that a reasonable expectation?
I think the United States is actually a good example of this. The United States does not fund these NGOs because some of them are affiliates of the PFLP or have PFLP activists in them. They just don't fund them. So the US is very careful with this, and that's actually an example that the Europeans should follow. It is very difficult to ascertain if there is direct terrorist activities going on through these NGOs, but as we said, any material assistance to a terrorist organization is prohibited.
Josh, are we talking about one terror group that has managed to sneak its way into the human rights network, or is this the tip of the iceberg, a microcosm of a much bigger picture?
Well, in the report, we're talking about 8 NGOs. We think there are more, but currently we don't have the evidence yet to talk about this. So it's possible there are more. There are definitely other foundations and funds and stuff like that. That's
connected to other terror organizations.
Yes, that's definitely true, and this is not a secret. Hamas and other terrorist groups have foundations and charitable groups that work for them. This is also not new information.
Is this a problem with the monitoring mechanisms within the European countries at large, that they don't do their due diligence, or do you suspect that there's a specific blind eye that's being turned in the instance of Israel?
Well, in general, we note that there's a lack of transparency in the funding processes, meaning we don't really know how they decide. We know that they fund certain groups, and we know sometimes with Palestinian groups, we know sometimes how much money is being given, but we don't know how they decide if this group gets money and this group does not. So that's actually a black hole for us, and that's also something we've been requesting for the Europeans for some time, to provide us this information, and have not gotten any response.
Josh Bacon from NGO Monitor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Egypt's Court of Cassation today overturned a death sentence against deposed President Mohamed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood and ordered a retrial. Morsi was sentenced to death in June last year in relation to a mass jailbreak in the country during the Arab summer uprising of 2011. Morsi, who was democratically elected after the revolution, was overthrown by the military in mid-2013 following mass protests against his rule. Morsi will still serve 3 lengthy jail sentences, totaling 60 years, on charges arising from the killing of protesters in 2012 and espionage. The first group of 127 UN peacekeepers returned to the Syrian side of the Golan Heights yesterday, 2 years after withdrawing their presence after coming under fire by al-Qaeda-linked rebel groups fighting in Syria. The troops were deployed to the Camp Fuar, and more members of the UN Disengagement Observer Force from Nepal and Fiji are expected to join them in the coming weeks. UN spokesman Farhan Haq said the troops will perform many of their mandated tasks, security conditions permitting. UNDOF monitors the 1974 ceasefire between Israel and Syria. Following reports yesterday that Agriculture Minister Uri Ariel gave the Russian Prime Minister an impromptu gift of a 200,000 shekel drone, today it emerged that Ariel did so in defiance of instructions from the Defense Ministry, which requires an export license to transfer drones to foreign countries. However, it appears that the US-manufactured thermal cameras attached to the drone were not given to the Russians as suspected, allaying fears that sensitive technologies had been given away. The drone belonged to the Volcani Agricultural Research Center and had been purchased with funds that did not come from the Agriculture Ministry. The ministry will now compensate the center with a new drone at the taxpayers' expense. This was the only scientific research helicopter of its kind in the country. Education Minister Naftali Bennett said today that scores in standardized tests on basic subjects given to students in the 5th and 8th grades have shown a general improvement over recent years. While results in science, Hebrew and Arabic tests were up in both grades, the 8th grade scores in English and mathematics remained the same. Bennett also told reporters that while the results also showed some improvement in closing the gap between results scored by students from upper and middle class backgrounds and those from lower socioeconomic sectors, serious differences still remain. Hebrew-speaking students from both grades still scored significantly better than their Arab counterparts in English, maths and science tests, despite an evident narrowing of the gap. Israeli men who refuse to grant their wives a Jewish religious divorce could soon find themselves in jail. Under a new directive by state prosecutor Shai Nitzan, it will now be a criminal offense for husbands to refuse to grant their wives a get after being ordered to do so by religious judges, and they can now be charged under the penal code for defying a legal order. Rabbinical courts can already seize driving licenses, issue bans on travel abroad, or block bank accounts in attempts to force recalcitrant husbands to grant a divorce. It's hoped that the criminalization of divorce will provide a legal solution for the halachic problem of 131 agunot in Israel, whose husbands continue to withhold a divorce in defiance of rulings by the religious courts. Explaining his decision, the state prosecutor explained that men who refuse to grant a get impinge on their wives' freedom and basic rights, and that criminalization should serve as an effective deterrence. At this very moment, some 24 swimmers are swimming across the Dead Sea. They took to the hypersaline water in Jordan this morning and are making their way to Israel to raise awareness of the plight of the shrinking sea itself. More from IBA's Aria O'Sullivan.
The Dead Sea, known for its salty waters where nothing sinks and everyone can float at ease, is disappearing fast. This morning, some 25 swimmers from around the world set out from the Jordanian side in the first ever known attempt to swim across the entire width of the sea in what is dubbed the Dead Sea Swim Challenge.
To raise awareness of the catastrophe that we are witnessing, of the Dead Sea declining by 1.20 meters every year. You're doing something that never have been done before.
The feat is life-threatening since swallowing even a little bit of water can be fatal. The swimmers wore a special full-face snorkeling mask. It began at dawn in Jordan, and the swimmers are expected to swim ashore on the Israeli side near the En Gedi Spa sometimes this afternoon, a swim of over 7 hours. The sea level, already the lowest spot on Earth, has been dropping 1 meter a year for the past 30 years, mainly because mankind has been diverting the rivers that flow into the sea.
Oh, it's absolutely crazy, but I mean, at my time of life, what a fantastic thing to do. I mean, it's so historic and iconic, and it's a swim that's never been done before. And of course, obviously, there's a message behind it, you know, the ecological message of the Dead Sea and how it's disappearing. And we really need to save it, not just for the people around here, but everyone across the world has to look after the sea.
The swim was organized by the Eco Peace Middle East NGO which brings together Israeli, Jordanian, and Palestinian environmentalists. Their hope is to find a solution that will keep the rivers flowing and save the Dead Sea. Ari O'Sullivan for IBA News.
Let's hope they swam with their passports. In finance, the stock exchange is up and the shekel is down. And in weather, tomorrow should be partly cloudy to cloudy, with another small drop in temperatures, becoming unseasonably cold with a chance of isolated light rain. And that's all for today. Laura Cornfield will be back again tomorrow. Until then, we leave you with images of last night's supermoon above the Holy Land.